My feelings towards Minecraft's combat system are mixed. On one hand, it's extremely slow and just straight up boring at some points, but I don't also think that it's necessarily bad, as I may have sounded in some of my videos. It's just not for me. Especially against monsters, it is extremely monotonous. You hold your shield up, they hit you. You swing your sword and shoot up again. Repeat that a few times and boom, most enemies are gone. If you're already fairly used to combat, the only moment you have to actually lock in during a fight against a mob is either when there are way too many enemies or when you get caught off guard. For vanilla, I don't mind it, I think it's a good system for the average player, but I'd like mobs to fight back a bit more, so you'd be in some amount of danger even if not overwhelmed by the sheer number of mobs. So welcome, I'm Ghosty, and today I'm going to teach the mobs how to fight. Now, we won't be using 100% vanilla combat for players either, we'll be using a modified version I made for another combat video, but with a few changes. Don't worry, if you haven't watched this video, we'll be talking about it as we go. Let's start by talking about what makes fighting mobs that easy. Once you lay your eyes on a zombie, you know it's going to walk straight to you and try to melee you. If it's a skeleton, it's going to avoid you while shooting arrows. If you see a slime, you know it's only going to split once you kill it. Their behavior is not only predictable, but also very simple and underwhelming. They always have only one way to do things that isn't very effective. And so, that's exactly what we're changing, by adding a few variations to some of the mobs such as zombies, skeletons, piglins and a few others, each one with a slightly different and not so predictable behavior. So without further ado, let's take a look at our zombies. That's the rock slinger zombie, and his main skill is just picking up a rock and throwing it at you. You might think that's not a big deal, right? And it really isn't, but he makes it a bit more annoying. He throws rocks because he's a cowardly little bastard. So if you get close to him, then he starts running, like a little bitch. And even though this is nothing when he's alone, he also usually spawns alongside other zombies. So many times you're fighting a zombie with a guy throwing rocks over its shoulder, which makes you need to focus on more than one thing at the same time. For example, you might be fighting this guy. He just looks like a zombie with a hat and a sword, but this isn't no normal sword. In fact, it's a dodgy sword that is way too light even though it's supposedly made of iron. Because of this absence of weight, the zombie is able to do dashes and try to attack you. Not only that, the dash is not always straight towards you. Sometimes he'll jump left or right and sometimes even try to dodge your attack by dashing back. Dodge a sword is a joke for the fact that they can kinda dodge. Do you get the joke? Of course, if you kill them, you might get their sword and it becomes your turn to do your own dashes. But there is another type of zombie that will probably land way less hits on you, but each hit will hurt a lot more if they do land, like broken bones and everything. Their skill is the best skill that you might recognize from my other combat video. This skill charges up for a second before absolutely destroying your opponent. Or in this case the zombie's opponent, you. You can block its damage with a shield, but your shield will also break. And be careful, when you're hit you get a few debuffs that also block your skills. Much like the dodge sword, axes also have skills, but you don't need to steal the brute's axe to do that, and instead you can just use any axe. This is basically something that also comes from my old video. And to talk about the next mob, we have to talk about another specific skill, the parry. This skill is the sword's skill, and it can essentially negate incoming damage from entities for a small window after you execute it. Now, if you look at this skeleton, you might notice that it's using a bow instead of swords to parry. So how does that work? Well, he'll use his bow until you get in melee range, at which point it will swap to an iron sword and go for it. Sometimes it will just straight up miss the parry, but some other times you might get parries a few times in sequence. There is a slight queue for his parry, as he slows down before using it so he becomes an easier target for you to hit its parry, so you better stay on the lookout for that. But if you're not into cool skeletons holding a sword, then you might like this guy. He's a cowardly little rascal that can use the bow skill, which is quick draw. Every so often, he might shoot 3 times in a row, and if you're not careful, this can hurt a fair amount. His behavior is mostly predictable, but he can get you off guard considering he doesn't use any special equipment, so it just looks like they're an average skeleton. Still in the overworld, you can also find a slime that behaves almost like a normal one. In fact, all it does is split just like the normal slimes do, but this one splits every time it's hit. Not only he splits, but it kind of throws the smaller slime towards you. That said, you can't make a farm using it as the slimes it throws don't drop any XP or items. Once it dies, it only splits into a few more of the smaller slimes that just die straight up once killed, instead of splitting. A close relative to the slime is the magma cube, and I've also added a new variant to it. Instead of splitting, this one is melting, and hitting it will throw a few parts of it up into the air. Those magma projectiles can be parried and they are not that big of a problem, but they can be annoying if you're getting overwhelmed by this type of enemy. And those are not the only enemies I've modified in the Nether either, so you might get overwhelmed by other types of enemies at the same time. But before we get into the next set of mobs, I'd like to really quickly ask you guys to like if you're enjoying the video and subscribe if you aren't already. Here's the funny chart and everything. Anyway, following the example of the angry zombie, we have the angry brute. He does look like a normal brute with armor, but don't be fooled. He not only can use the bash skill, but he starts chasing you like crazy right before the attack lands, so you're probably not outrunning him and would be better off just finessing it. There is another variation of piglin brutes that uses shields. As almost always, they can use a skill that the players also have access to, which is the shield charge. The shield charge is a new skill that also causes a stance break, just like the bash, but it can be used much faster and is way more defensive, as you'd expect from shield. It makes you, or in this case the brute, lunge forward and knock your opponents away, temporarily disabling their skills, slowing them down and causing weakness on them. It does deal damage, but it can be blocked, although not parried, just like the bash. Now, as for the smartest mob we have, it would probably be the fighter piglin. The fighter piglin. It can use a sword, an axe and a crossbow. Not only that, it also has extra health and his armor is netherite etched. They can use the skills that the axe and the sword have, while switching through both, so you might want to be careful. Don't get your shields up when they have an axe, and be ready to be parried away when it has a sword. Just don't get knockbacks into lava. Still keeping the pig-like creature theme, we have the angry hoglins. You might have noticed that I'm very creative with names, I know. So, you remember the shield skill? Yeah, it's basically that, I won't bother you too much with it. It lunges forward and throws you away. And maybe not the scariest, but the one that has the highest damage output has to be the fighter wither skeleton. It uses a sword like any other of his kind, but their skill allows them to do 3 quick hits in succession that cannot be ignored. In fact, they will hurt a lot if you ignore them. Like, probably more than you'd like. If you're not using diamond armor, don't even think about getting hit by all the strikes. It is incredibly rare, but you can also get a wither sword from killing a fighter wither skeleton. So, this was my solution to make mobs harder. Each one of them has a different behavior that you have to be ready to deal with, and sometimes it's impossible to deal with all of them at the same time, meaning you might have to try a different approach other than just fighting. You might have noticed that some mobs didn't have any variations added, but that's because I'm saving those for future videos, so that's what you have here for now. If you want to install those modifications, just check the description down below and you'll see a full explanation on how to do that. Anyways, thank you guys for watching and for all the recent support I've been getting. My subscriber count more than doubled last month and it really makes me happy to see you all enjoying this as much as I am. That's it for me for this video, and as always, I'll see you guys on the next one.